So like most Linux users, until fairly recently, I've been using Bash, but I finally got around to switching to Zshell, and honestly, it is just so much better than Bash. So if you're new to this channel, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs, and any help would be really appreciated. So now that's out of the way, let's get started. Good afternoon everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So in this video, what I'm going to be showing you is my Zshell configs and a couple other things that aren't necessarily Zshell related, but I made some changes along the way since I switched from Bash. So let's actually jump into some of those changes. So let's go into I guess we'll start up with my Z profile. So nothing too different happened in here. So this is basically the same as what I had before. So my Z profile is going to be run as soon as I log into my shell. So what this is doing is it's checking if I'm on TTY1, and if I am, that should be p-grepping BSPWM, not i3. If I am in TTY1, then it's going to check if I've got my window manager open, and then it's going to run startx. So by doing that, I don't have to write startx every time I log into my system. So let's have a look at another file now. So maybe one that's a bit more interesting. Maybe my Zshrc, for example. So v.zs, and this is actually cool. So as you can see in here, I've now got syntax highlighting, and also the zsh autocompletion is just so much better. So you can actually cycle through all of these. I'll show you how I'm doing these in just a second, but let's actually have a look at this file. So the first thing I've got in here is the same thing I had in my previous RC file, which is opening up NeoFetch as soon as I open up my shell. Nothing too special there, like, you don't really need that. Obviously, it's just kind of an aesthetic thing. I like it there. Maybe you don't, but I do. So next up, we have this enable colors. So this isn't a tutorial per se. This is more just me looking at my configs and telling you what I'm doing. I copied most of this from Luke Smith, so I'm not really sure what a lot of the actual keywords you need to use actually do. All I know is that what I have in here does what I say it's going to do. So next up, we are configuring the history. So I've got a history size of 1,000, and save hist I'm not sure about is also 1,000. I've just got those at the same number. They were, I think, set to 10,000 in Luke Smith's config, but I've lowered them to 1,000. So that'll just mean that I can have up to 1,000 things in my bash history. So in this, well, it's actually my ZSH history now, that not my bash history. And then this line here changes changes the place that my history is actually stored. So by default, it's stored in your home directory, but my home directory is already a mess. So I thought, let's actually use some of the folders that I have and actually, not make it messier. So next up, we actually have enabling that auto completion. So these two lines here will actually enable the thing where I can go and actually tab through these. So I've done some extra binding so that I can also use my Vim keys to move around, but to enable just tabbing, you need to put in these two lines right here. And then this next part is actually kind of useful. So not these two lines here, these two right here. Actually, no, it's just this one. Yeah, it's just the one. So this line right here will actually let me do case-insensitive matching. So I actually think this is really useful. So let's actually open up a terminal, and let's cd into my pictures folder, for example. And because I named these folders terribly, my wallpapers folder is spelt with a capital. So what I would have to do on bash is type it out like that, and then I could autofill it. But with this, what I can do is just start writing out like that, and then it will actually fix it for me. So that I think is actually really, really useful. Now the rest of these are just loading in a auto-completion list, and this last one here will actually let me auto-complete on hidden files. For some reason, that's disabled by default, so this will let me do things like, say I want to bring up my RC files, or like my bash RC, my bash history, any of these. Any of the files that actually start with a dot, so those are your hidden files, if you weren't sure at all. So if you've used bash before, you might know that it has a Vim mode or a Vi mode. So Zshell also has this mode, but it's actually a bit better. So we go in here, I can type out, I can press escape, jump back into normal mode, and there's a couple of extra things you can do. I don't think you should do things like change word. Maybe you could. I'm not sure. But by default, you don't have the ability to open up in a Vim buffer. That's because, unlike the bash version, you actually have a visual mode built into this. So if you pressed V on the bash version, that would actually take you directly into a Vim buffer, whereas pressing V in the ZSH version will take you into visual mode. I don't know how you feel about that. It'll depend on how you use it. I've got another command a bit later in my RC file that'll actually let me open up a buffer anyway, but this is what it does as it stands. So these next parts in here will actually let me do what I was showing you before, where I could go, let's say I want to write in cat, and I don't know what file I want to cat. So if I was to press tab, that would bring up the autocompletion. So by default, you're supposed to tab through this. But with these bindings in here, that'll actually let me move my cursor around with my Vim keys. So yeah, basically it does what Vim keys do. Nothing too special there. I've also included the arrow keys because occasionally, I don't know, my hand will be on that side of the keyboard and I'll hit the arrow keys. I don't really use them. Typically, I'll just use the Vim keys. Then this next one here is actually to fix a bit of a bug that exists with Zshell. So with the Vim mode, or Vi mode, whatever, if you type some stuff in insert mode, I'll actually remove this and show you what it does. So if I type some stuff in insert mode, like all this, and then I was to go into normal mode, move anywhere, doesn't really matter, then I jump back into insert mode, I can't use backspace to delete anything. I don't know why, it's just some weird problem that exists when you switch between the modes. So what this will do, will just let you switch between the modes. Remember to actually save that first, so save that, open up a new terminal. Now if I type some stuff in here, jump back into normal mode, as you can see my cursor changes. Then I jump back into insert mode, and now I can delete stuff again with my backspace key. Obviously I could just use X. I prefer using backspace though, it's kind of more of a habit from just using more traditional text editors. Or not traditional text editors, more normal text editors, I would say. So this next part here, I'm not really sure how to explain it. What it does though is when I switch between my different modes, so I type some stuff out, switch into normal mode, and you can see my cursor changes to this block. When I go back to insert mode, it changes back to a beam. That's what this little function does here. As I said, I pinched most of this from Luke Smith's config, so anything that I'm not sure about is probably from there. So this next part here is just to initialize my cursor to being a beam. I'm not really sure why you need all this stuff in here, but this is what was in Luke's config, so I just kept it here. I don't know exactly what I could remove and what I couldn't remove. I'm just going to leave it there for now. So I mentioned that you can open up a Vim buffer through a key binding. So I've bound that to Control V. So if I type some stuff out, and then I was to press Control V, that will then basically open up in NVim, which is what I've got set as my editor. So I save that, and it doesn't automatically run it, which is nice. Sometimes you want it to automatically run, sometimes you don't. It's probably safer to not have it automatically run, in case you're doing something that could be potentially dangerous. So yeah, that's what that does basically. Now these next couple of ones are things that I used to have within my ST configs. I did a video on how to actually write a function to execute commands within ST, but I've moved those over to bash now. So we've got Control G, which opens up LF, but will also do my CDing with LF. So if I go to a directory with LF, then I quit out of LF, I'll actually CD into that directory. So I can just briefly show you what that looks like. So open that up, let's go into like, I don't know, some random directory. In here works. Now if I quit out of it, as we can see, my path has now changed. So that's just a neat little thing that is kind of nice to have sometimes. Then we also got bindings to show my history and also clear my screen. Nothing too special there, it kind of does what you'd expect it to do. So this next line in here will just load up all of my shell configs, so all of my functions, my aliases, and all of that stuff. Nothing too special there. I've done a separate video on how to actually set that up. Basically what this will do is it'll loop through that folder and then just source all of those files. Nothing too special there. So if you want to do that syntax highlighting like I had, then I'm just using this plugin right here. So what is it called? ZSH syntax highlighting. You can install this through any of the ZSH plugin managers, but if you're on Arch, they're all available in the AUR, so you might as well just do that. So these next two plugins are actually really cool. So this first one called You Should Use. So this will suggest aliases that you have defined within your configs. So what I mean by this is, let's say we write git add. I've got an alias for this defined as GA. So if we try to run this, so it'll say, hey look, you actually have an alias defined for git add, you should probably use that instead. So if you occasionally will forget your aliases, this is a good way to remind yourself of them. And this next one comes from the package file package. What this will do is it'll actually suggest the package that certain programs are in when you try to run them. So let's say we want to run something like cvlc. I don't have that installed, but what this will do is it'll suggest which package it's actually available in so that we can install it. So we try to run that, it says, so cvlc may be found within extra/vlc. So it gives you hints for where the different programs you want to use are available so you can actually go and install them. And this last one in here is just my prompt. So previously I was using Starship. You may or may not know that. It's basically this prompt right here. I've now switched over to Spaceship, but I've made it look exactly the same as Starship. So I've pretty much disabled everything that Spaceship does so that it can be the same way as my Starship config. The reason I did this is because Starship actually had this weird bug where it wouldn't let me switch between using a beam and a block for my cursor. I don't know why. There was some conflict between that and the ZSH configs. I don't know what it was, but I switched over to Spaceship and it works perfectly fine now. So I've also made some changes to my environment variables. Nothing too special. So this is just a new format for the environment variable. Nothing too special here. I've added go into my path. That doesn't really matter though. So this thing I want to show you in here was this less term cap. So this is really cool. I don't understand it whatsoever, but what it does is really cool. So let's actually briefly show what that does. So don't you think that man pages are just really, really boring? Wouldn't it be cool if they were colored? So let's say we want to look at the man page for cat, for example. Now look at this. We have a colored man page. I'm not a big fan of the colors right now. I might try to customize them, but this is really, really cool. It doesn't really do anything productive, but it's nice to be able to have that bit of extra color on my terminal. So along with that, obviously I showed you the syntax highlighting earlier. I'll just show you that again. So if we type in a command that we have like lf, that'll actually turn green. And then the options, let's say we want to, I don't know, look at go or something. So that's white. But if you do a regex, or if you put an asterisk with a regex at least, it'll turn blue. I'm not really sure why it turns blue. I think it looks cool though. And the other one was if you type a command you don't have, so that will then turn red. That's all just really, really cool. And it's not super useful. If you know what programs you have installed, then you're going to know what programs you have installed. But it's just a nice bit of extra feedback that you can get. So one last thing with the autocompletion is that if we type in a program we have installed and we've typed dash, then that'll actually let us list out the different options that are available so we can cycle through those. So that's also really, really cool. So this doesn't work with everything. I think it only works with programs that have a man page. Occasionally you'll run into GitHub projects that don't have man pages for whatever reason. So you can't autocomplete like that. But generally it's going to work, and it's always really cool when it does. So I think that's pretty much everything for my Zshell configs at this point. I'm going to go into more detail about some problems you might have when you switch over to Zshell, and why I'm not a big fan of Oh My Zshell, and a couple other things like that. But for now, I think that's good enough for my configs. So one thing I would like to mention before the video is over is actually that when you install Zshell, you basically get nothing. So if I just delete my entire configs, you don't actually get an RC file. I think you can generate a really basic one, but if we just delete everything and I open up a new terminal window, this is all you get. So it says your host name, it has a $sign at the end of your prompt, and we don't get colors. I think we get basic auto-completion, like if you type out a word, yeah, you can basically do what you do with bash, but so that'll list out everything, and you can also type out something and then it will suggest different programs you want to use. But this is about as complex as you get with bash. It might even be less complex. So the cool thing about Zshell is that if you don't want to use most of the features, most of them are just disabled by default. But if you do want to put a little bit of effort in, or better yet, you want to just copy my configs, you want to copy Luke Smith's configs and get a really nice Zshell config and something that'll work really, really well, then Zshell is a very, very powerful shell, much more so than bash. A lot of this stuff you can do with bash, like you can bind keys within bash, but when it comes to doing plugins like syntax highlighting and things like that, I don't know if it's even possible with Bash, and if it is, no one really cares because Zshell exists. Let me know if something like that actually does exist with Bash though. I would be interested to actually find out. So I think that's pretty much everything for this video. So if you like this video, remember to smash that like button and leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. If you want to see more videos like this, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help will be really appreciated. Up on that corner, I've got the playlist that this video's in, so go check that out if you want to see other videos like this. Down below, I've got my Discord, so if you want to chat with me, go there. I'm in there most days, and if I'm not around, just send me a message and I'll respond pretty quickly. Maybe I won't, I don't know. I might be doing something that day. I'll definitely respond at some point though. So I've also got my library, which right now is the only platform outside of YouTube that I'm actually using to host my videos, and it is growing really, really quickly, so I'm really appreciating all the support that I've been getting over there. I've also got all of my support links down below. There's like 5 or 6 different ways. Go check them out. Feel free to use any of them, or if you don't want to use any of them, you don't have to support the channel because all the videos will remain available for free, but any help will be really appreciated. And lastly, down below, I've got my Twitter and my Mastodon. So go there if you want to get video updates because you're not going to get any on YouTube, so just go check those out. So I think that's pretty much everything for me now, so I'm out.